Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again today with our webinar. Excellent to see people joining us. Of course, this webinar is kindly brought to you by SafMed. SafMed is your solutions partner in both the CCC and operating room and has been so for over 35 years. This is webinar 1 of our new series for 2023. And in this webinar, we are going to focus on effective cleaning of instruments and surgical devices. I'm so proud of everybody who's managed to join us today. I know that we have so many conflicting things in our work life all of the time, and to find time to take a little bit of time out to learn something new or to study or to remind ourselves about these important aspects can be tricky. So well done for doing that, and well done to all of those that will listen to the recording of this session. It is really good to see that we are proud of our profession and that we want to continue learning. And continuous learning is a mindset and something that can serve us well. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined. So what will we cover today? As we said, our topic is cleaning and how do we clean effectively. So firstly, we need to define what cleaning is and make 100% sure that we understand what it is. And we're going to look at that from the research point of view, from all of the guidelines and from the published papers. Then we want to delve into really deep work on manual cleaning and what it takes to clean something effectively manually. We will also look at semi-automated type cleaning, things like ultrasonic cleaners. And then lastly, we'll focus on automatic cleaning using washer disinfectors. So this is what we'll cover over the 3 webinars in this series. So what is cleaning? So let's go to the textbooks. Let's start there. What does it say? It says cleaning is the removal of contamination or soil from an item, an instrument or a device, of course, to the extent that is necessary for its next step, for its further processing or its next intended use. Of course, the type of soils can vary, and they can be patient-related soils, something from the patient themselves, or something from products or products used on the patients or during the surgery. And that, of course, means soils can be organic or they can be inorganic in nature. Organic soils include things like blood, mucus, feces, urine, tissue, such as those found in the skin, in the muscles, in the bones, etc. All of those areas are in the eye, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, as you can imagine, from any bit or part of the body. Of course, those are all made up of proteins, carbohydrates, lipids or fats, or lipopolysaccharides, which I understand to be a combination of carbohydrates and fats. Microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi, gels and lubricants that can sometimes be of organic materials. And then inorganic materials, salts, such as sodium chloride, metals, including things like iron, other elements and molecules like calcium or iodine, cements, for example, that we use in orthopedic procedures, chemicals used on the skin or used directly on a device or on a patient, preoperative or postoperatively, that may have now contaminated our surgical instruments. So these are the types of soils that we will come across on our instruments, and how on earth are we going to get all of these soils off our instruments? So for cleaning to be effective, we need 3 basic things. We need detergent, we need friction, and very importantly, we need water. The end result of all of this cleaning is that at the very least, the instrument should be visibly free from dirt, visibly free from stains or impurities. We'll take a deeper look at what clean is a little bit later, but at the very least, it needs to be visibly clean. And visibly at this point, we're referring to when you look at it with the naked eye. But of course, bearing in mind that some of us can see better than others, so it is a bit of a tricky scenario. How do you define something as clean? What's the job of the detergent? Well, the detergent's job is to break down, loosen, and assist in removing those soils. So it's going to break down all the proteins and the lipids, the fats, the bones, the bits and pieces that are on the instrument so that we can get them off. friction itself, or friction is produced by a mechanical action, and that action can be from rubbing or scrubbing or brushing with a brush or manually, or of course it can be mechanical action from the force of water, like you would get in an automated washer disinfector, or the bubbles that are formed in the ultrasonic cleaner. There's the mechanical action, that part of the job of creating friction. And the third component, of course, is water. And water's job is to aid you in the process of removing and rinsing the soil away. So if we don't have these three things, we are never going to be able to clean something adequately. So detergent, friction, and water, the basis of effective cleaning. Talking for a minute about detergents. So please remember that on the SafMed YouTube channel, there is a whole webinar series, I think it was 2 webinars we did in a row, that looked at cleaning chemistries in great detail, what they're made of, how they're made, a little bit of that, what their value add is, and you can take a look at that if you want to look at cleaning chemistries in more detail. But if you haven't seen that one, and or if you have, let's remind ourselves about these types of detergents. So when I'm talking about detergents now, I'm referring to surgical grade, medical grade detergents designed for cleaning the nature of soils that we find on our surgical instruments. We know that we shampoo our hair, we use shampoo, we don't use laundry soap to shampoo our hair with, because it's a completely different substrate. It's a different set of substrates designed for a specific function. So enzymatic detergents use enzymes, and these enzymes create a chemical reaction, and that chemical reaction helps to break down the soils into smaller particles. Once they're in smaller particles, it becomes a lot easier to remove them and wash them away. Neutral detergents have got a neutral pH. They tend not to be as effective in hard water. Alkaline detergents can break down a whole range of soils and can be very effective in hard water, but they have a higher pH. So because of that, they have some limitations. We tend to use them not with manual cleaning, but in an automated washer disinfector. It's not the only detergent one can use in a washer disinfector, but that's the tendency. But you also have to be aware of their limits, because there are some material compatibilities or incompatibilities that might become a problem. Certain things like aluminiums don't respond well to alkaline detergents, so very important to take this all into consideration. We already spoke about water, and water itself naturally contains numerous elements, and those elements can include minerals, can include metals, it can include bacteria. The quality of water and the components of the water are going to vary based on where you live. It's going to be based on the seasonal rainfall. So the water that you get in Joburg in May and the water you get in December can be very different. And of course, how it's being treated by the municipality from the area that you live in. Water can really affect the efficacy of cleaning. So when the chemists and manufacturers are developing these types of detergents, they have to take that into account. So that's why you'll find certain detergents will work better under certain circumstances. We can take a detergent that somebody uses in the UK or somewhere overseas, and they say it's really, really awesome product. You can bring it into South Africa and you try use it in Johannesburg and it might work well, and you take it down to Port Elizabeth and perhaps it doesn't work so well there because the water is totally different. We know that the Eastern Cape has been so dry and they've got very little water left. So waters will perform and detergents will perform differently depending on the area and the water that they're used with. Here are some images from the field around South Africa that we've come across. These are on the first left-hand image that's inside the glass door of a washer disinfector. This most incredible amount of grit and grime and dirt that's just building up in that washer because of the poor water quality, and that was close to a mining town. The one in the middle is a sieve from an ultrasonic cleaner. The one on the right, again, inside of a washer disinfector. But notice that the two, the build-up on the one on the left and the one on the far right are very different. It's because the content of that water is different. The one on the right is more calcified, whiter in texture. The one on the left had a lot of soil in it. So very different soils and water quality that we end up seeing and finding throughout the country. Things you have to bear in mind. All right, so let's have a look at all of these images. These are all devices that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And how in goodness name are you going to clean them? Okay, so we've got water, we've got detergent, but we've got to apply friction. Can I reach all of the crevices and grooves to apply friction to these types of devices? Does the device have a lumen? If it's got a lumen, is it open-ended or is it a closed-off lumen? How long is it? What diameter is it? What type of finishes are there on the instrument? Has it got grooves on it? Is it smooth? Is it what type of material is it? Is it delicate? Is it complex? Is it hard to get to? Are there a whole bunch of moving points? And what parts of it are getting contaminated? And of course, with what soils? So we really and truly need to have a look at the design of the device itself, and we need to understand, can it be dismantled? If it can be dismantled into one, how many pieces? How many pieces that are there are movable parts? How many can't move? How many are fixed? What substrate is it made of? Is it just metal? Is it stainless steel? Is it titanium? Is it aluminium? Is it aluminium and some other components or substrates? Are there plastics? What type of material is it made of? Very, very important things that end up influencing how we're going to clean something. Can I immerse it? Can I not immerse it? How am I going to manage this device? Very important. How complex is it? So the design of the device is extremely important. There, in fact, is a tree, use the word a tree, that the specialists use when they try and define complexity of a particular device. And there's a family of devices that you can put your instrument into a certain category so that you can understand its complexity, and that the manufacturers will do. So this published paper in the American Journal of Infection Control talks about the effectiveness of manual versus automated cleaning on Staphylococcus epidermis biofilm and its removal from surgical instruments. So for now, we're just going to focus on some of the points around this published paper. In our future thingies, we might look at it a bit more deeply as well. Cleaning is considered to be the most important step in the processing cycle for surgical instruments, especially for its influence at the end of the day on the effectiveness of sterilization. I think the saying, we've known it for a long time, if it's not clean, it can never be sterilized or never be sterile. Cleaning promotes the removal of a variety of contaminants, such as blood, mucus, fats, of course, and reduces the microbial load that remains on an instrument after use. And therefore, it ensures the safety for reuse on the patient, but it also ensures the safety for the staff. Don't forget, we've got to now handle these instruments to compile them, to get them ready for the next case, to put them in their tray, and we need to be safe while we're doing that as well. So that's a safety issue around cleaning. So because of what I do, I spend a lot of time on websites and in all sorts of environments, and I come across the most amazing headlines. And these headlines are actually quite scary. Sometimes I don't sleep at night as a result of them. If I was a patient and I saw these headlines, it would be even worse. Do you really want to be the one that says Hospital ABC in, let's see, Port Elizabeth exposed their patients to some form of infection? Imagine this. Dublin VA may have exposed 4,000 veterans to infection with improperly cleaned equipment. Mercy Regional cuts back on non-essential surgery after discovering a cleaning issue. Here we have at the Porter Hospital at least one day, hundreds of severe infections linked to Porter Hospital's use of contaminated surgical instruments. Lawsuit alleges. Lawsuit. This is a very important concept. It may seem so simplistic, but cleaning is actually so important. This particular journal publication, called Complex Design of Surgical Instruments as a Barrier for Cleaning Effectiveness, favoring biofilm formation. So, of course, the authors remind us that inadequately reprocessed, reusable surgical instruments may harbor infectious agents, which may then be transmitted to a suitable site for replication. In other words, it's going to end up in the next patient, and the patient's going to end up with an infection. Okay, we all know that. All right, we knew that. We knew that it's possible to transmit disease with a dirty instrument. But did you know that the microbial load on an instrument can be as high as 1,500 colony-forming units per instrument. That's incredibly high. So cleaning's job is to get rid of the bioburden as well as the potential microbial contamination before we even get to the next part of the process. Because if we try putting the instrument in the next process, which could be, of course, steam sterilization or a low temperature sterilization process, with this high volume of microbial load on it, there is no way that the steam or the sterilant is going to be able to kill all of that. It's just too much to expect. So what the authors did over here was they decided they were going to look at reprocessing these devices. So they took 20 of these lone set type devices, so flexible reamers and depth gauges, and they purposefully inoculated them with a broth of sheep's blood and microorganisms. So now when a manufacturer actually makes an instrument, they have to do this anyway. They have to do this process to prove to you that if you follow all the correct cleaning steps they've given you and the reprocessing steps that they've given you, the device will turn out to be sterile. In this case, the researchers wanted to see what would happen if they repeatedly do this on the instrument, so contaminate them, wash them using different types of cleaning methods. I'll talk about them now, and then see if, in fact, there was any biofilm formation 20 cycles later. So inoculate, wash, inoculate, wash, inoculate, and test each time in between, doing this 20 times to see after 20 times if there's any biofilm on these instruments. We know that the complex design of some of these reusable surgical instruments is one of the factors that may negatively affect proper reprocessing, because it's damn difficult, if not impossible, to brush during the cleaning process. If you don't do all of this, there is a chance that it can contribute to biofilm formation. We also know that once biofilms form on a surgical instrument, they can be very difficult to detect and extremely hard to remove. So what was their finding after repeating this process 20 times? They found that manual just manual cleaning and manual plus automated cleaning significantly reduced the amount of protein residues for all instruments. Okay, that's great. They found that there wasn't viable bacteria, thank goodness, after sterilization in their research setting. So remember, this is in the laboratory setting. This is not the real world. This is them repeating this process. They then used a scanning electron microscope to look for soils after automated cleaning and after manual cleaning. And what they found was they did find some, firstly, but they also found biofilms when instruments were only cleaned manually. So, is that a good thing to only use manual cleaning? It's a debate, isn't it? We can get biofilm formation if we only use manual cleaning based on this research. Tricky. Again, another important reminder why it's so important for us to reprocess our loan sets and to reprocess them correctly. A lot of our loan sets are orthopedic in nature and they are very, very complex in their design. And if we are only washing them manually or we're not washing them before we receive them, are they really as clean as you think they are? What will happen if we put them under scanning electron microscope? All right, so what about this other very important point, and that is the manufacturer's instructions for use? Remember, I said a manufacturer has to provide you with a set of instructions when they sell you a new instrument, and they have to do this in order to register it, in order to sell it to you, they have to go through this process. And that is all covered under a particular ISO standard. So that standard is ISO 17664. Now, ISO 17664 was adopted in South Africa. I think it was in 2021, 2022. I stand to be corrected. But we now have adopted this standard in South Africa as well. And it's titled Processing of Healthcare Products, Information to be Provided by the Medical Device Manufacturer for the Processing of Medical Devices. So the manufacturer of a medical device has a responsibility to ensure that the design of the device itself actually facilitates the achievement of effective processing. So they've got to make sure that it's designed in such a way that you can clean it, that you can reprocess it, that you can sterilize it. The manufacturer must have these objective evidence, so proof that if you follow their steps as they have described them, that the instrument will in fact be cleaned, disinfected and sterilized if you follow the instructions for use. Now, some of you may be aware of some of the outbreaks that were related to flexible endoscopes, and in those incidences, in some of those court cases, what had happened was that even after following the instructions for use, the staff were still not able to decontaminate the devices correctly. So, very, very important to follow the manufacturer's instructions for use. Let's have a look at an example of one of these instructions for use. So this is a Thompson's retractor. So it's a blown set device, or a device that can be part of a loan set, or something that you perhaps can own. And the first thing on the instructions for use that it states right at the top over there is that the hospital must ensure that they carry out these instructions for use using appropriate equipment, using the appropriate materials, and that the personnel that are doing this are in fact properly trained. So not just anybody can come along and clean these devices, and then you expect a complete or correct result. So that's the first part. Number one, follow them properly, use the right materials as we have guided you over here, and use somebody who's properly trained. In their guidelines, they talk about point of use or pre-cleaning, and they say the following: we must disassemble the device. It goes into a bit more detail, but I've just summarized it for today. You need to rinse and flush using lukewarm running water. Whilst you are doing that, you remove the excess soil using a non-abrasive cloth. Not a brush at this point, a cloth, and not just running water. Number one. Number two, if you're doing a manual process, so firstly you need to do the pre-cleaning, then you do the manual process. Say you don't have a washer. Your next job is to soak this device in an enzymatic solution, obviously mixed correctly, for 20 minutes. I've never seen anybody soak any device for 20 minutes when cleaning it. Scrub with a soft nylon brush, then rinse under water for 3 minutes. Then submerge in the ultrasonic cleaner for 10 minutes. It also specified the hertz, so how strong the ultrasonic cleaning should be. Then rinse in distilled water for 3 minutes. Then dry with a lint-free cloth and or compressed air. Okay. Now, if you've got a washer, you would have done the pre-cleaning part first, and you would have skipped that manual section. But before you put it in the washer, the instructions will say, rinse with cold tap water for 2 minutes. Scrub with a brush. Load in the automated washer, fully extended. Then it goes on to describe the phases and the cycles, the wash cycles in the machine itself. So you can't just choose any old cycle parameters, and you can't just press, okay, I'll just do the one with the one wash, the quick wash. No. It stipulates you want a pre-wash with cold tap water. Temperature of water matters, we'll talk about that just now, for 2 minutes. Then you want an enzymatic wash. Then you want the main wash for 2 minutes, and the temperature needs to be at 65 degrees. Then you want the rinsing, and then you want the rinsing with purified water, and then you want the drying cycle. And the drying cycle should be, I think that's 7 minutes, if I can see clearly, at 115 degrees. That's the requirements. So if something happens, patient, you've used this retractor on the patient goes septic, the first thing the lawyer says is, have you done everything that you were supposed to do? And one of the things you were supposed to do was decontaminate, disinfect, process that device on the instructions for use from the manufacturer. So the first thing is, do you actually have any? Often with the loan sets, we don't. Nobody sends you anything to tell you how long it should be processed for or how it should be processed. That's problematic. We should have a file, an entire file loaded with instructions for use for every device we own, as well as every device we loan. Really, really important. How can you prove that you've done your job if you don't know what it was you were supposed to do to begin with? Yes, we want to say, but we've done it this way for 25 years. But we can't carry on with like that. Our patients are getting sick. We really and truly have to move forward and change and learn and grow. We need instructions for use. Before you buy a new instrument or any device, please, 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 can you get the instructions for use so that you know that you've got the piece of equipment required to do that reprocessing. So we've had a lot of hospitals come to us to help them to get prepared for their new Da Vinci instrumentation, because they tend to, thank goodness, follow those hopefully correctly. And then they'll ask for the right type of cleaning device. Is it an insert in your washer that can be used that's specially for the Da Vinci instruments? And what the detergent can you use, and what cycle parameters can you use? Is it a very special ultrasonic cleaner designed for with a specific cycle cleaning of those particular devices? All right, so then what is clean? So for a number of years, I scrubbed for urology, and the sister who used to do the morning list was somewhat older than me. And in those days, we sadly only soaked our instruments. We never got them to go to a steam sterilizer. So I'd arrive on duty and she'd say, oh, I've cleaned everything. Here it is for you. And I take a look at it and go, oh my goodness, these are really and truly not clean. But she had, with all of her heart and all of her sincerity, had cleaned them. It's just that I could see better than her. And so how do you know that something really is clean? What light did you look at it in? So to the naked eye, at the very least, something can appear clean, but of course, when you look at it under some form of magnification, or you test it in the laboratory, or test it with a protein test soil, residual soil may very well be present. So how do you define clean? So the textbooks remind us that clean, therefore, can have a visible, a biochemical, or chemical, or even a microbiological endpoint. So how do we define it? So certain countries have therefore defined requirements for testing and ensuring the efficacy of cleaning by recommending using test soils and by defining the amount of protein levels left on an instrument. So many countries have done that. So there's a definition around that in 15883. That's the ISO standard for washers, for automated washer disinfectors. And 15883 has been adopted in South Africa already. And how do we do all of this verification? Well, we use test devices. So type of test soils as well as types of devices, like a load check, for example. So that's a device with a defined amount of test soil on it that you put in your washer disinfector that can tell you whether it's clean or not. Or potentially we use things like residual protein tests as advocated in our guidelines and our textbooks. Let's recap for a minute now. What have we spoken about already? We've spoken about soils, different types of soils. There are lots of different ones from the body, organic and inorganic ones, and they all differ how we need to clean them. And if you think about it, when you spill red wine at dinner on the cloth, how you clean that off versus how you get grease off a shirt or a blouse that you got all over you while you were cooking in the dark. Very difficult, very different types of soils. You know that you're going to treat them differently. We know that there are different types of detergents. We know that we don't use carpet shampoo to wash our hair with. We know that we need to rub and scrub it. We need friction. We need water. We need water of good quality, and poor water quality can affect the outcome. We know we have to take into consideration the complexity and the design of the instrument, what it's made of, what its substrates are. And we also know that we have to follow the manufacturer's instructions to try and get something clean. Properly clean. Of course, PPE, 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 PPE. I'm not focusing on PPE today, but PPE is in itself a safety issue. In fact, handling chemicals is a safety issue. And don't forget, according to the Office of Health Standards Compliance on the dirty side of the CST, we need an eye wash kit of some sort because we are handling chemicals. They're all chemicals, all sorts of chemistries that we deal with them. We need to be able to wash our eye out should an incident occur. I think we should put together a whole completely different webinar series on safety in the CSSD environment. All right, so going back to cleaning, point of use, keeping it moist as well. So point of use is normally in the operating room. That's where the scrub sister needs to wipe down the instrument during the procedure. Hopefully she does that. Normally they do, because otherwise the instrument tends to clog up and doesn't work well. So taking a little swab or a cloth at that point and trying to wipe off as much debris as possible. Always making sure to use water, not saline. At the end of the case, spraying the instruments with transport gels or foams and keeping them moist, because we know keeping them moist will make it a bit easier by the time it gets to the CSSD. Right, so now we're receiving all of these items, we need to sort them, and we have to assume that everything that comes back from the theatre is contaminated. And don't forget about the instrument trays, they themselves need to be washed. Don't forget about sharps at this point, another safety issue. Now we need to disassemble them, and things that have got more than one part or moving parts may need to be opened up, they may need to be disassembled. Why? Because we need to expose the surfaces of the device to the cleaning process. If we don't do that, it won't come clean. The number of times I've been to a theatre or a CSSD complex and the artery forceps are still on the stringer, closed, and in the washer like that. I'm not sure. And the excuse is that, well, they never looked like they used those ones. Really? Yes. Right, the instructions for use may call for pre-rinsing, and that could be something that's part of the initial cycle in the washer. It could be something that you're doing at the basin. Remember, then you want the temperature of the water to be less than 45 degrees. Why? Because if you now got a whole bunch of proteins on an instrument, you use hot water to rinse it with, you're going to bake on the proteins, and it becomes harder to remove them later. In the washing phase now, it could be manual, it can be semi-automated, it could be a washer disinfector, it could be all of the above, based on the instructions for use. And of course, we need detergent, friction, and water. And ultimately, we need to rinse the device because we want to remove the residues of the soils as well as the residues of the cleaning chemistry to be able to render it as clean, or defined as clean. Remember, I spoke about safety. Corey Ofsted has published quite a few papers now of late. One, I think, again this year in the American Journal of Infection Control. And what she started to look at is how much splash and how much dispersal is there, droplet dispersal is there, when you're cleaning different types of things in the CSSD environment. So how did they do this? They took this purple paper and they attached it to the area around the sink, the wall next to the sink, on the floor, and then they attached it to the staff members' PPE in different parts of them, as you can see on the face shield, on the arms, down the gown. Some people, of course, don't wear gowns, so they also tried to see what it would look like on the arm itself if you weren't wearing a gown. So obviously everything was now to identify what reprocessing activities or what tasks will generate splashes, and to determine how far droplets can travel, and to actually look at whether the PPE is adequate. Let's have a look at some of the pictures. So these are just the ones of the person's PPE. As you can see, there were splashes all over this individual. They were all over the floor. They were all over the unit. And this was specifically cleaning. I can't remember what instruments they were now. They were quite specific about what they were cleaning at the time. What did they find? Droplets were produced during all manual cleaning activities, except when running the ultrasonic cleaner. Just filling the sink, the droplets traveled 3 feet. So 3 feet was that, just under a meter. In some cases, the droplets actually traveled up to 5 feet from the sink. That's what, 1.5 meters, give or take? And that the PPE didn't really prevent skin exposure to the droplets. Please be very careful when you are applying your PPE. Whole different matter to go into. Righty up, so we need a sink, right? We need at least 2 sinks. Some would advocate for 3. One for pre-rinsing, one for washing, one for post-rinsing. The sinks need to be at a reasonable height. What's reasonable, because I'm tall, somebody else is short, it's tricky. How deep does the sink need to be? The sink needs to be big enough and deep enough to be able to submerge the instrument. But at the same time, if it's too deep, you're not going to be able to reach in there to actually get it out or handle it, and then we don't clean effectively or properly. We don't apply the correct technique if we've got the wrong set of circumstances. We need our detergent water solution, so the dilution matters, remember. And again, follow the manufacturer's instructions for use. If you put too much detergent in, it becomes difficult to rinse it off. If you put too little in, it's not going to be effective. If you're using an enzymatic detergent and the water temperature is cold, it's not going to activate the enzymes. It's not going to clean properly. If you use really, really hot water, you're going to actually attack the enzymes, and they are going to be less effective now when it's too hot, because you've kind of injured them. Then, of course, it's the correct type of detergent, which we've spoken about a few times already. And please, I do not want to see you reprocessing with hand wash soap. You know, that red soap that you use at the scrub basin is for hands. It is not for instruments. So all of those who take the laryngoscope blade and nip to the scrubbing basin, which is not the right place to clean either, and use the scrubbing brush the surgeon just scrubbed with some hand soap and clean the laryngoscope blade, it is wrong. That is absolutely incorrect practice. Then what method of cleaning is it? Am I going to immerse it? Can I immerse it? Is the device able to be immersed? And if I am immersing it, well, that's great if I can immerse it, because I want to wash under the waterline to reduce splashing as well as aerolization of microorganisms. Check the instructions for use. Friction, I need the correct brushes, the right size brush, the right type of brush. Does it say nylon? What does it say? What does it say? Soft brush, hard brush. Don't forget about the grooves. Don't forget about the teeth and the joints of the instruments, because those are really complex areas to clean. Just to remind us again about our chemistry formulation, this is an experiment that Nancy Kaiser performed. What she did was she took 2 stainless steel or standard surgical scissors. She put one in tap water for 5 weeks, and she took the other one and soaked it in an enzymatic water solution for 5 weeks. And then looked at them. As you can see, the one that was just soaking in tap water for 5 weeks has corroded. The one that was in the enzymatic solution didn't, because that enzymatic solution contained some substrates that were corrosion inhibitors. Again, another reason why you use the right detergent for the right job. What do we want from our cleaning chemistries? We want them to be able to remove organic and inorganic soils. We want them to retain minerals in the water. So if your detergent's got things like chelating agents in it, it binds with the minerals in the water and it keeps them in the water, so you don't get those white spots. So those minerals can be disastrous for your instruments. We want them to be low foaming, because foam can interfere with cleaning equipment. It also makes it quite difficult to see what's in the basin, which is a safety issue. We want the detergents to be safe to use on the instrument materials that you're using, because remember, we've got stainless steel, titanium, copper, brasses, plastics, laparoscopics, coatings, all of those kind of things. So we need to make sure that the material won't be damaged by the type of detergent we're going to use. We want something that's liquid and free rinsing. If it's liquid, it's normally easy to mix and can be accurately measured. If it's free rinsing, we want to be able to rinse off both the soil, the debris, as well as the chemical itself. We need a detergent that's biodegradable, which means that it can be digested by the standard bacteria that you find in lakes and rivers, so that we don't damage any plant life or any animal life. And then quite useful if our detergent is a concentrate, because if it's in a concentrate, I'm going to get more cycles out of one bottle, which will reduce my carbon footprint, which means I buy one bottle, it'll last me longer, versus buying 10 bottles, which means more trucks, more airplanes, more whatever to bring it to me. Remember, carbon footprint is also very important. So I'm still cleaning, am I not? And while I'm cleaning, I must inspect. I need to make sure that I'm actually cleaning everything off. I need to refill and replace the sink water periodically. How often? I can't tell you that. It depends, doesn't it? Depends on how dirty the dishes were. It depends on what was on there. Depends on how much blood, how much debris was on the device. And of course, over time, the water is going to cool down, which then renders the detergent a little less effective. I need to rinse in a separate sink, again following the manufacturer's instructions for use. We saw in the Thomson Retractor, at points it said under running water, other times it said under soak in the water. You need to follow those instructions. Drying with a lint-free cloth or with compressed air, depending on the requirements of the instructions for use. So there are a multitude of advantages and disadvantages to manual cleaning, as there are to automated cleaning, all types of cleaning. What are the advantages of manual cleaning? Well, sometimes it's recommended, and it can be the right thing to do for handling delicate or some complex devices. It might be right for things that you can't actually immerse, like some drills, for example. Sometimes it's considered cheaper. Is it? It's a debate. It does allow you to see while you're busy cleaning, to see whether you actually are cleaning effectively. What are the disadvantages? Well, reproducibility, as in, do you do it right every single time? Do you actually do it right? Because it depends on an individual's performance. And today you might be in the mood and tomorrow you're not, so you may not clean as well from one day to the next. And there's really not much way to validate it. Maybe a residual protein test is the best way. The safety issues in terms of risk to the individual doing the cleaning. It's labor intensive, it's time consuming, and there's no thermal disinfection. No thermal disinfection, of course, means the instruments are less safe for us while we are busy handling them to compound them. Let's have a look at this published paper, and it talks about what you're going to find on a surgical power tool during routine use. Many of the latest designs of surgical power tools, parts of them can go into the washer disinfector, but some can't, and some can't be immersed, and so how we clean them is really difficult. So in this paper, they go on to state that power tools have complex designs and may restrict access to cleaning and sterilization, and frequently become contaminated with microbial and all sorts of tissues and residues following use. What type of residue? So in this particular research, they took the left-hand column were these devices that they tested before, and the others were devices that they tested after cleaning. So they looked at some rotary things in dentistry, orthopedics, the ultrasonic type thingies for eyes and neurosurgery, so the instruments, not ultrasonic cleaners I'm talking about, laser and robotics. What all have we seen? Bacteria like Staph aureus, hepatitis, hep C, proteins, pseudomonas, blood, protein, fungi, eye lens tissue, yeah, I suppose in orthopedics, in eyes, cellular debris, herpes, oh lovely, HIV and bacteria, and some proteins on robotic instruments that they tested in this particular research. Point is, instruments become contaminated with a hell of a lot of soil debris and microorganisms, and cleaning is important, really, truly important. Just a point to touch on now, I want to talk about, and that's hand hygiene. Hand hygiene in the CSST. So this is published research now recently, 2021, in South Africa, in the South African Journal of Infectious Diseases, around hand hygiene in a major central hospital of the operating theatre staff. The authors go on to state that non-compliance with hand hygiene practices by non-scrub staff has increased microbial transmission to patients and, of course, to the environment in general in the operating room. The duration that microorganisms are going to survive on your hands will differ, depending, of course, on the microorganism itself. And some can survive for more than an hour on your hand. So imagine what all you can transmit off your hand to a variety of surfaces. So in this research, they took samples collected from the hands of 75 participants. By the way, 2 of the doctors they approached refused to be involved. I thought that was interesting. The participants included 25 anaesthetists, 25 surgeons, and 25 nurses. They managed to culture or grow 18 commensal microorganisms and 21 pathological microorganisms from the hands of the staff in an operating room. So if you have a look at the bit more detail, we've got the commensal ones, which are ones that are not pathological but can grow on hands, but they can become pathological to somebody else, of course. And then we have pathological ones. The anaesthetists, the males and the females, both had on their hands the surgeons with the highest. And that was thought, the authors thought process was that maybe because the surgeons had been in the wards with the patients, and that's maybe where they had picked up most of these commensal organisms. But there they were on the hands of the staff in the operating room. So I had done some, gender thoughts in my mind and made the assumption that the ladies' hands would be cleaner. Well, I was wrong. I wonder what the results would be if we did this on our staff in the CSSE, both those compiling sets and those washing instruments. Because we do tend to put on our PPE, hopefully, well, we are better at it now since COVID, at wearing our PPE when we're cleaning our instruments. But scarily, I don't see people washing their hands too often after they remove their PPE. And remember, we spoke about all of that droplet transfer. These microorganisms go everywhere. They're all over you. Then you scratch your neck afterwards, or you wash your ear, or you're going to transmit disease. Not nice. All right, so coming to an end, what have we learned today? Quite a bit, I think. Some of it we knew, some of it was a reminder, some of it hopefully was new information. We know that cleaning is the critical first step in the decontamination process. We need to clean off a variety of different types of soils. We need the correct techniques, we need the correct chemistries, we need the correct accessories, and more than anything else, we honestly have to follow the manufacturer's instructions for use. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will, in a day or two, send you a link to a recording of this session in case you missed something or you joined in late or you want to share it with your staff to be able to view. We'll also send you a link to the test. If you take the test, you will be emailed a certificate of completion of attendance of this course. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same place, for part 2 of this webinar series. Thank you then. Bye.